Vocabulary is a hugely important topic in an overall understanding of language pedagogy because vocabulary conveys the bulk of meaning in communication. Vocabulary motivated my study into second language acquisition, and it remains a key part of my approach to pedagogy. In this video, I am going to talk about what vocabulary knowledge consists of along two major themes: vocabulary types and dimensions of knowledge. I'll also talk about how much vocabulary learners need to know. And finally, I'll talk about what I think is a useful way to approach vocabulary pedagogy. So let's talk first about the nature of vocabulary knowledge. Our vocabulary knowledge is complex, and it's integrated into all domains of communicative competence. Let me just give you a couple of examples. At a simple level, vocabulary denotes basic entities and qualities, so words like cat and dog and chase and angry and hungry. It denotes relationships through nouns and other means, mother, sister, but also prepositions like next to and above. It structures discourse and relationships between ideas with words like first and next and then and on the other hand and in spite of. And it also indexes sociocultural belief systems, for example, endearment or respect. So, for example, the difference between grandfather and grandpa. To discuss vocabulary types, I'm going to shift terminology now. Vocabulary in common usage denotes single words, but I have a problem with that, and so I want us to use the term lexical item. In English, and in many other languages, a lexical item therefore entails, yes, single words, but also phrasal verbs, so things like get up or get over, speak up, set phrases with a prescribed order like salt and pepper. We don't say pepper and salt. We say on the other hand. Variable phrases like good, morning, afternoon, evening, which all serve as a greeting. And then, of course, you have your traditional idioms like kick the bucket and raining cats and dogs. The essential point here is that we need to have a phrasal view of vocabulary, not just single words, where groups of words operate together with different degrees of glue or cohesion or fixedness, having some kind of meaning that arises out of that group of words working together that may or may not be a clear sum of their parts. As for dimensions of knowledge, this is complex. When we know a lexical item deeply, we know the following dimensions, and I'll just enumerate them for you. We know their spoken or written form. We know its meaning, whether it's prototypical or figurative or metonymic. We know appropriate contexts of use, that is to say, pragmatic constraints. We know the grammatical function in that particular context. We also know alternate grammatical forms. We know semantic preference, which is like the thematic associations. Is it a medical term or a legal term? We know collocations. We know colligations, that is to say the grammatical patterning, semantic prosody or connotations, and also discourse elements of that vocabulary. So just to get the acquisition ball rolling for a learner and get communicating, that learners need to know just like three basic dimensions: the form in some way, the meaning, and the way it connects to the words around it grammatically. And those are the basics, but they're not sufficient in order to become truly idiomatic of usage in a language. If you want to be super proficient in terms of idiomaticity, you really need command of those other dimensions. Ideally, a learning program sets up ways for learners to discover all of these aspects of knowledge in a way that is developmentally appropriate or accessible. So how much vocabulary does a learner need to know? Let's rephrase the question, like to do what? So, for example, if a learner needs to comprehend just a single text, well, the rule of thumb is that you want to comprehend, in order to comprehend a text well, you need to know about 95 to 97% of the vocabulary on the page. And so for teachers, this is one way of setting up goalposts for your lessons. To meet daily needs of vocabulary, we typically say that people need 2,000 to 3,000 words just to kind of get by in society. But to succeed in college, a learner needs like 10,000 words. Keep in mind that vocabulary should be learned in all cases in a way that is specific to the topics or the domains of use. Like you don't just teach decontextualized vocabulary. Okay? You need to keep in mind that this vocabulary is serving some larger purpose of communication, and it should be studied as such. So what does vocabulary teaching and learning look like? Well, I have a couple of principles, and I'll just enumerate them right now. First, learning has to emerge out of a focus on meaning, some kind of communicative act that creates a need for knowledge more deeply. So you don't lead with decontextualized practice. Decontextualized practice happens after some kind of communication. Number two, vocabulary instruction and learning should tackle the different domains of lexical knowledge. Number three, an important goal of vocabulary instruction should be to make learners motivated, create a culture of enjoyment around vocabulary. Number four, a goal of vocabulary instruction is to make learners autonomous of the teacher. Don't just teach vocabulary, teach metacognitive strategies. When I see teachers going through the paces of teaching vocabulary in class, for example, it should almost be in a way sometimes to make sure that they're modeling how to learn vocabulary. Number five, reward the adoption of self-guided learning strategies. Number six, vocabulary instruction has to be deliberate in both incidental and pre-planned exposures. So this does not mean all vocabulary items to be learned are pre-planned in any way. Lexical targets can be incidentally encountered, like when you're reading a book for fun. But there has to be some deliberate treatment or plan for those incidental targets. For example, I train my learners, as I do for myself, for example, that when I'm reading a passage, or before I even start reading a passage, I scan the page, I look at the topic, and then I start noticing vocabulary I don't recognize, and I underline it. In other words, I make intentional noticing a key part of my vocabulary collection strategy. Once those words are underlined, a learner is set up for later steps of a deliberate learning plan. Number seven, in the context of incidental learning, have learners buy into the if you see it but don't know it, you flag it, and then think about it. If you look it up, you write it down. If you write it down, you study it later. Don't just let learners feel it's okay to continually step over what they don't understand without going back in some way at some time to figure things out. Number eight, vocabulary instruction should involve dictionary skills. Number nine, learners should have vocabulary journals. Number 10, vocabulary instruction should train learners to study the context around the target when they encounter the word inside of a text. Number 11, vocabulary instruction should set up the conditions of distributed recycling of learning. So there's repetition and there's variation, and it keeps coming back. Number 12, vocabulary instruction should provide lots of opportunities for discourse length focus on meaning. So create situations where learners have lots of exposure to and use of vocabulary in texts and talk. And number 13, vocabulary instruction should set goals for quantity of vocabulary and not just depth of knowledge. So what do I mean by this? If a learner immigrates to the United States and wants to go to college in 4 years but has a 2,000 word vocabulary, that learner is going to need 10,000 word vocabulary to be successful on the college level as a freshman. So how much vocabulary does that learner need to actually learn in a day? There's a balance of about 8,000 words over 4 years. That's 2,000 words per year. And so let's just say this person is a good student and will dedicate 5 days a week to studying vocabulary, 52 weeks a year. That makes 153 words a week. That's 30 words per day, new words. So what kind of work do you need to do to learn 30 new words per day? How much reading and listening of authentic language do you need to encounter? How much study time do you have to dedicate to making those words stick in your mind? At the end of the day, it's a huge task, and teachers cannot dedicate class time to all of the vocabulary that learners ultimately need, but they can leverage class time to make learners better, autonomous learners.